Hey guys, Santoli here with another YouTube video. For Master Duel this time, we're here with Luka Kovac, my son, who is going to be helping us with this tier list. Draco Tail just came out on Master Duel, so I think I had no better guest to bring on than him. I'm talking about the different versions of it and how it performs for the upcoming DC Cup. We do have that in 2 weeks, the weekend before Christmas. And the meta, I think, overall has been a lot better than it was. The first DC Cup had a lot of Malice and Razo at a very, very high power level. Wasn't the most enjoyable format I've played in, but now with Detail, a lot more mid-range decks at least as an option, as well as still having some combo decks. If you enjoy those, the format's shaping up to be a lot better. So we're going to start with ranking the Detail decks, and I'll go through the versions and we'll talk about the opinion on each of them. So one is the pure Detail deck. This can also be including Cartesia or some other supplementing engine if you want to play King of the Swamp or whatnot. But it's mainly say you're not having any other engine to do things that aren't really detail plays. You have your stuff to help make seals, facilitate your detail engines, but nothing else on top of it. Then you have the Branded Fusion engine. So this is what is popular in TCG right now. We have two Branded Fusion and Master Duel as well. We have Fallen Alabaz, and you also play the Frixel here. We do also have the addition of Verte on Master Duel, which means that you have the ability to get to Branded Fusion access through Verte, which is very cool. I don't think it's game warping because you're usually trading that off instead of seals, and it's a little bit better than seals, but I don't think it's completely game warping. But it is a cool option to have, especially getting more traps and rotation that way. And then the final version we have is the Magician's version. So this is generally done playing 3 Spool or Spenta, so that's the card that hasn't come out yet. 1 Crowley, which is the one where you add to your hand, you can special summon it, and then fuse for a Magistus or an Invoked card, as well as 1 Zoran. It is a tuner,
Zora.
and the basic combo of this deck when you open with Spenta is that you make a Savage very early on, and then you're able to still get to the Magician's fusions through the Crowley later on, and then facilitate detail plays that way. So, what are your thoughts on the different versions? What do you think is the best of them? If they're all the best, go off, Luka.
I think for sure the best version to play this deck is the Draco Tail branded deck. The addition of the Verte is not necessarily something that's too small. Like it definitely does make a very big difference in your gameplay styles because now when you don't open Branded Fusion, you can go Verte effect. You dump Branded Fusion from deck, and you can dump Albaz and Frixel, summon Sanctifier, or you can dump the Verte from your board as well as an Albaz from deck to summon Mirror Jade if that's like the line of play you want to go for. So the Sanctifier line gets you to the 3rd trap if you didn't have access to it, which is really important, as well as just having Albion rotation Sanctifier. That card is insane, especially you can special Albaz to your field, use it as future material on your opponent's turn. In the mirror, you can make stuff like Secretarion and stuff with that. Or you can summon Frixel, add it back to the hand, special a Malulu or a Lucius from your graveyard, and it's just more advantage and more fusion summons overall. It's going to be like a very, very solid deck, and I expect it to be the best deck going into the DC Cup. The pure version, however, I don't think is as good because you don't have access to the same Verte lines that you do with the other combos. So Seals is still a very, very good card and is one of the reasons to play Draco Tail, in my opinion, in the TCG. However, I think the Verte lines are significantly better because 1, you can't be ashed on Verte, which is very solid. 2, Sanctifier is just significantly better than summoning a Malulu. And 3, you have whatever your supplemental engine is likely probably worse than Branded Fusion in going second because you can like with Branded Fusion, you just have the bomb of going activate Branded Fusion, you dump Malulu and Albaz. Negate a card to your opponent's field, you summon Lubellion. Lubellion can either make a Star Source Dragon to pop 2, or you can do stuff like make a Mirror Jade, which is very solid. So I expect that it's going to be a little bit worse. I'd probably put it in around the solid decks level just because I don't think it's as high as the Magistus version either. The Magistus version with the Zoroa stuff, I am a very big fan of making the Borlo Savage Dragon. However, I don't think it solves the issues that the deck really has. My main concern with Draco Tail is being able to play to start if I have a weak hand, and Zoroa doesn't fix that issue at all. The fact that it has to be a normal summon doesn't means that your plays are a lot weaker if you do actually get interacted on the Zoroa. Because while you can go Crowley, or you can use the Spenta in graveyard, you banish it. If for those that don't know, Spenta says that you can discard it to search a Magistus monster from deck to hand, and then its graveyard effect is it banishes itself from the graveyard, to place a Magistus monster from your extra deck or your graveyard you equip it to a a monster you control. So while it's okay in terms of how you want to push into a board, it just doesn't provide the same amount of value as like a normal summon of a Lucius to search for a 5 mana does, because it's not a fusion summon immediately. Crowley can only also, there's two targets in the extra deck primarily for the fusion summon. One, which is Iwas, the Magistus Spell Spirit, who requires a Magistus and a Spellcaster. And the second target is your Zoroa, one of the fusion monsters, and he requires a Magistus monster plus an extra deck monster. The concern, however, is that if you open some of the cloggier dragons in your deck, like Urgula Pan, your engine doesn't actually fusion summon with those cards, so you can't make anything of importance that actually lets you get going. So I do consider it to be a very strong engine. However, because you do have to draw the supplemental Draco Tail cards with it, I think it's a little bit worse than the branded deck.
I think keep in mind as well for evaluating these is that Draco Tail is perceived to be one of the best decks, and so it's possible you're going to get hit with a Retalicy in the Duelist Cup. Doesn't mean everyone's going to be on it. It's kind of depending on how much you want to build for, how much there is. It will probably change throughout the course of the day. And I think that the Brand Fusion version is actually just fine into Retail. It's not the end of the world, especially the Verte lines. Like you can just, if you normal Lucius and you have a monster heavy hand, you can get to Verte without using any spells, and just feels really good to Retails that way. And I think a lot of times when you have the no supplement engine, it can be a little bit rough into it. And same with the Magistus version, even though you're leading with a monster, if you have a weak Draco to head, you do need to get to the spells to actually fusion summon, and then that's a chance to retail. Then you're burning the Savage Negate on retail, which isn't the best feeling in the world. So I am inclined to agree with the positioning of these. I think they're all fairly good, but I do think the branded version just stands out a bit above the rest of them.
Yeah, I'm for sure inclined.
Go on.
I'm for sure inclined to agree. I think Retaliating Sea is going to be a very big part of this format going into Duelist Cup. I do definitely agree with the take on the Magistus cards. While you do have the negate for the Retal-C, it doesn't necessarily mean that the game is immediately like in your favor just because you've used your Savage Negate already, and there's a bunch of different interactions your opponents can have. Additionally, the Magistus cards are notably worse into Droll and Max C, so that's definitely something that could come up in this format, as well as being a lot worse into Fua.
Okay, moving on to the Mitsu and Razo versions. So the big thing with Mitsu that's lost for the pure version is that we don't have 3 Extrav and 1 Prosperity. We only have 1 Extrav, and I think it is a bricky deck already in TCG. That's my biggest concern. I think when it plays, it's very good, and there are some other supplementary stars you can play. You can play more of the level 4. You can play Double Mirror just to have prep live more often just by not having the 1 mirror turn off the other preps. But I think that's my main concern is just consistency, especially when you're playing into hand trap decks. And Ash and Bell are both going to be in the format. I think it's fine, but I don't think it's particularly anything insane. I think solo deck is reasonable. Anything to add, Luka?
I'm for sure inclined to agree. You do get to play Impulse, which is pretty important in this format, just because it's pretty good into Draco Tail. You can use it either when you're going second on a card like Branded Fusion, if you want to interact on their turn, or you can use it against a copy of 5 mana if they're fusion summoning on your turn, which is it's pretty big. Just being able to deny your opponent fusion summons is very important in the Draco Tail matchup.
The other option is Mitsu Rise. So this deck has 1 X and 1 Sword, so there's a consistency hits there. I think X is kind of the biggest benefit of playing Razor cards in a hybrid, and having less of them isn't ideal. The other issue with this deck is I just feel that it's a bit clunky, and I think Draco Tail just does a very good job at punishing clunky decks because it's not doing anything unfair. But as soon as you start having dead cards that aren't playable because you're playing conflicting engines, it just feels a lot worse. Mainly because the board may be breakable if I'm only ending on 3 traps and you maybe have 1-2 hand traps, but if your cards just aren't activatable because it's a clunky deck, then you get punished. And so I'm inclined to put this again also in solid. I'm not sure if I'd put it above or below Mitsu. I'd probably put it above just because it does have a more power level. And it does fix consistency issues, but I think the clunkiness is just a concern for me there.
Yeah, no, I think I definitely agree. The one thing I will say about the Raziel cards, though, is you can probably play some form of smaller package in this deck. You don't, you probably don't play the cross. You probably don't play the node. It makes your duo drive a little bit worse if you're still playing that. I think Infernal Flame Banshee is probably the better way to go with these cards. Um, but I do still think that the Raziel cards are incredible and they provide a lot of value in terms of um, like starting an normal summon ice still adds you four Raziel bodies. Um, which is obviously like insane. But you can go like ice into X, you make like an IP Masquerena right away, and you special sword add ice. You have to pitch a card, which is fine, I guess. But you can make like Feral Imps, which bridges to your Mitsu cards, or you can make like a detonator. I think the cards are still very, very solid. I will say though that the clunkiness is definitely going to be an issue with these cards, just because opening something like a sword or maybe like a Node Raziel is probably going to be very unoptimal. And your Mitsurugi cards already provide a lot of bricks. You've got Armasa, Saji, Kusanagi, even like the Ritual Monsters, the Ritual Spell. They're all just not good to draw.
I agree. Moving on to the Dododo Razel deck. So this doesn't have any additional hits other than the Razel hits. Also, Bonfire is a one, but it's been like that for a while. I think that this deck is a bit better positioned. It's not clunky in the same way. The bad draws aren't particularly garnets. They still are extenders. They're just kind of bad extenders. Like if you draw the Kage Kage, it's still an extender. It's just you rather have drawn something else. But the big thing is they actually do things. And unlike the Mitsu Razel deck, I feel this deck has a lot less of an issue with the traps, mainly because this can threaten Exciton very early on. If you're forced to leave the Mitsu cards into Draco Tail board, it feels awful. But just leaving generic 4s, I think, feels a lot better. And so I think it does have a better matchup in the Draco Tail just because it's less clunky and because you have a more clear play pattern of how to go into it. The big problem with basically every deck that's not Draco Tail or some of the control decks is that Fu and Maxi are both cards, and so Draco Tail just kind of gets a buff because of how good it is to play into those. And so this deck still has a bit of a disadvantage because if either of them resolves on it when you're playing against Draco Tail, if you have the Maxi back, it doesn't feel anywhere close to as good. But I think this deck probably has the best game plan actually how to go second into Draco Tail, which is just you start summoning 4s, threaten Exciton every time, and it gets very problematic for them to deal with everything. I probably put it in very strong contenders. I put it near the top as well.
I have no more comments on the deck. I think the deck's honestly insane going into a board.
I think this is what you would lean towards if you're a fan of the Razel cards. I don't think the Mitsu cards are particularly the way here. Even I should point out as well, pure Mitsu playing Floodgates, the format's still a bit too diverse to rely on Floodgates to win, especially in BO1s. Moving on to some less of the top tier decks, we talk about White Forest. This is a deck that has gone the full power of it now. You have all the final wave of support from Alan. It's a combo deck. There's Maxi and Droll is still played as well, even though it's strictly the format just because you can self-Droll for some decks. Both those are problems. Fu was a problem. I'm down to put this near the bottom.
I think I kind of agree. So the thing with White Forest, I will say though, however, it has some pretty solid half boards that you can put up with stuff like Diabellstar Vengeance. Was not particularly a massive problem with the deck. Like you can get away with giving them like 2 to 3 draws, and you said it's still set up a pretty reasonable board of like 5 to 6 interactions. However, one big concern with the deck is Fua on when your opponent's playing and they draw Fua as the 6th card and activate the Fua right away. A lot of your interactions actually do special summon from the deck first or the extra deck before actually destroying something. Something like Diabellstar Vengeance destroys and then special summons another guy for a disruption. Woes of the White Forest also specials from deck, and then Synchros immediately after, so you're giving them 2 draws, not even just 1. But I think I'd probably lean towards putting in Do Not Touch as well.
I think the one thing to consider is is one of the few decks that can play Breakers. Which I think can be good into the detailed decks. I think, just starting your turn with pitch Blackout is actually very good into basically every deck we talked about here, turning off Altharion, turning off the Detonator or a Murakumo. It's almost just because of that card alone I want to put up a little bit higher, but I don't think it's well positioned overall.
Yeah, I think Blackout's insane as a card, but I think playable is probably the place I'd put it.
Sky Striker is up next. I think that this deck is okay. The biggest problem with it isn't the format or anything specific. It's the fact that the format's just very diverse. The way you want to approach detail is more of a value-oriented matchup because you can break the board, but they're going to have so much follow-up. And their end board isn't insane that you need to layer breakers onto it. You want to play a value game. But then a lot of the other decks in the format are very combo oriented, where you really want to have every breaker alive imaginable. Also, I think that your end board when you go first is okay into some decks, but not great into detail because it's just so good at pushing through boards. It just doesn't really have a solid game plan, in my opinion, that can work through a large amount of the meta. It's playable for sure. Like the new support is decent, but it just has issues of like in a BO1 you can't really tailor your deck to do something good into every matchup, and that's what the deck kind of needs.
Yeah, no, I agree for sure. The new support in the form of Lemnis Gate and Zero are obviously very, very solid cards overall, very high quality. But the issue with the striker cards in general is that it's still just not enough when you're going first. Like you can't expect um, Widow Anchor plus a pop plus like maybe another disruption in the form of like Zeke with your Ray on your opponent's turn to be enough to just win the game on the spot.
So next up, we have the Gemini deck. So this is traditionally played in the combo version with Fiendsmith cards. I'm going to talk about more about the blind second version. Right now, the combo deck, I think, is dead because we have Kashtira gone. I don't know if there's any immediate replacement. But I'm going to talk about the go second version because this is the version I have a lot more experience with. I play it for the first EC Cup. I think this deck is actually decently positioned. We saw Anthony Zhu in the TCG top back-to-back YCSs with it. We also have the card in the form of Reboot in the format, which is very, very good into Draco Tail. It's also good into some of the decks. It's decent into the Malice because of Reboot. It's decent into more combo. Maybe you're relying on drawing that card too much, but you still also have Maxi, Fua, whatnot. The non in the format's okay into this. It's if someone like Anthony Zhu was playing this deck, or I think he had success with it, yes, I think if you play it at that level, it is decent. And it does a very good job at beating the half boards of decks if they chummy them, or also has decent time into the control decks, which is the big thing. So I'm kind of put this in solid, but near the bottom. Thoughts on this deck?
Yeah, no, I for sure agree. The one thing I will say is immediately after topping the YCS, Anthony Zhu actually shot me a message and said, "I'm never playing this deck again." um, but I think the deck is actually pretty decent as a go second choice. I think the issue, however, is again it's an issue with Sky Striker as well, where you're tailoring the deck to try to beat the best deck in the format, like Draco Tail. But the reality of the situation is a lot of those cards like that you're playing like your breakers are just not as nearly as good into the other matchups as well, right? So you have like, let's say you decide to play something like Reboot. Reboot doesn't actually do anything versus the Automat Ryzeal deck. Like you're gonna get some form of FTK'd either by like a million material detonator plus cross plus whatever they set up with Plasma Hole. I guess you can trade with Plasma Hole, but that's not really that great to be honest. Or you're gonna play stuff like I don't know, Forbidden Droplet, and it's not going to have nearly as good a use into Draco Tail outside of just like dodging flame.
I think the one thing with this compared to Sky Striker, because there should be a bit of difference between solid and playable, is that I think the Gemini engine is just a bit better at pushing, like it ends the game, as opposed to Sky Striker's win con being it grinds sometimes, and that kind of difference is noticeable because if your cards trade but not effectively, but they trade enough for you to kill, that's good enough. Where Sky Striker doesn't have the luxury, they need to trade and they need to trade effectively. Um, it makes me almost want to put this down a little bit more, to put more space in between them.
I will say, I think Sky Striker has a significantly better backup plan than the Gemini deck does if they don't kill. Like a lot of the time with your Gemini cards, there's not really like you can crack the board, but if you don't kill them, I think the game's pretty much just over if you pass it back to them. But with Striker, if you don't kill them, you actually have this backup plan with like Zero and maybe like a Widow Anchor or two set where you actually have like a little bit of a grind and pass back because you still have like your engine intact as you pass it back to them.
It's interesting. I think we kind of view that different ways. Where you viewed it as a positive striker being on the grind, where I viewed it as almost a liability that's a force in the grinding sometimes. So, I mean, it's a bit of both, but I do think Gemini just card quality wise is a little bit better and can use some of the better cards like Reboot. You can't play that in Sky. Moving on to Cash, I think this deck has outlived its time. People still play it because it's just a Master Duel special of go first, summon some big idiots, and set some back row. Don't touch this deck. You can, of course, still win games by doing that exact thing of go first, summon big idiot, and sets them back row, and you can win off that. But I don't think this has great game plans going second. It's a diverse format. You can't have your tech cards trade super effectively. I don't even think the cash cards are that insane. The form of Unicorn, which is usually the best card in the deck, it's hit. Let's just not touch cash, please.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely inclined to agree. I was thinking about this a little bit earlier. I was like, wait a minute, my Rise Heart can take Malice cards. And then I realized a Rise Heart's mandatory, so it's always going to be Chain Link 1, and their Malice guys are always going to be Chain Link 2. So you're never going to be able to resolve a Rise Heart to take one of their guys. Like, almost every starter in this deck is hit. Like, you have one Fenrir, you have 2 Unicorn, I think you have 1 Planet as well, right? So you have, like,
Yes.
4 starters of a possible 9 there. Your engine's going to be a lot weaker. But, like, the one benefit I will say Cash has, you can play all those Warcrime Floodgate cards like Dimensional Fisher, you can play Macro, you can play Shifter. A Rise Heart itself is basically Shifter on legs, which is going to be really solid into the Draco Tail matchup. However, I will say the one issue with a lot of these anti-Draco Tail decks is if they draw 5 mana, you're probably still losing the game anyways, because if you activate any of these like Warcrime cards, they'll just chain the 5 mana, and you're probably not going to be able to gain as much value from those cards as you wanted into the matchup.
Continuing on with the other stun-ish / trap decks, we have Labyrinth, which is another old staple. This deck does have the ability to loop Deep Barrier, but I just think that I don't know how much faith I have in it going second. I think Detail just has a lot of good answers into it. I also think other decks can outgas it a bit. It's not horrible by any means, but this is also something I would consider somewhere near
Probably
the
put
bottom.
a do not touch. Yeah, I think it's a little bit better than Cash, but I don't think the Labyrinth deck. While it has the plus of being able to loop D barrier, it's also got the issues of just like the format syndrome, where Ash and Bell are both very, very good non-engine cards, both of which interact with Big Welcome, which makes the deck a lot weaker. It also it doesn't utilize cards like Maxi well enough or Fuelos to be able to push. Do you resolve the Maxi? So it gets a little bit awkward sometimes for sure.
I think I'm inclined to put this in playable the more I think about it, just because I think that you do have the both Impulse, which is a very good card, as well as Songs of the Dominators. And I think this deck, at least when it goes first, has a very, very solid game plan. There's just a lot of decks right now, they play a lot of non-engine, and that's just awful versus Lab. And sometimes those cards just buy a turn enough, and you can just win by having guaranteed engine through the Lab cards and winning with those tech cards. But I wouldn't put it much higher than that. I'll bump Sky Striker down a little bit more just because I think Gemini does what it wants to do better.
I think that's fair.
Moving on to the Odeon deck. So this deck is hit on Master Duel in a fair few ways. So one, like I said, with the I'm not sure what deck is it. I think I said with Pure Mitsu, we have less pop cards. So we have 1 Extrav instead of 3, as well as no Prosperities, both of which this deck used. You also have no terraforming, so you are really, really starter light on this deck. And my biggest concern is consistency. I think that just setting Floodgates is not necessarily enough to do anything. I think that until we solve the consistency issue, it's not that great. Playable, yes, but I think that you're really just hoping that the Floodgates get there. And it's a diverse format. You go first, you activate D-Fissure because you think you're against Draco Tail, then they go activate Mitsurugi Ritual. They're playing Pure Mitsu, and it just feels awful. So that's my biggest concern there with the deck.
I will say, I think this is a very, very good format for the Odeon deck. While it does struggle a little bit into Draco Tail, particularly going second into the deck, it has a pretty decent going first matchup if they don't draw 5 mana plus names to be able to outstuff. It doesn't deal with bodies particularly effectively, which is my concern into the Ryzeal decks. However, I think the negates into Draco Tail will be enough to carry it over the edge. I think I'd put it in solid.
You do have the full package of the Dominus cards minus Spiral, so that is a lot of effective cards against Draco Tail as well. Yeah, I think I'd still put it maybe a bit above Gem Knights. I almost feel like there'd be another gap here where we can almost do split again, but we'll just keep things here like this. It might be one of the better trap decks. At least the one thing with this deck has over Labyrinth is you're no longer getting hit by Bell, which is a massive thing. Also, Fua and Max can trade a little bit better into Labyrinth, where at least you're getting a draw. With this deck, they're just completely dead. I think that may have one thing going for it, but I wouldn't want to put it too much higher.
Yeah, well, Maxi there is a little bit of an issue with, because if you just use it on your opponent's turn instead of shotgunning in the standby phase, you're going to be drawing cards for each trap they activate. So that might change things a little bit, whereas Labyrinth doesn't necessarily need as much setup. If you're not doing like the full welcome plus big welcome combos. Like if you just summon a guy, and you just set 4 traps and pass, like you traded 1 for 1 basically with that maxi, and it didn't do enough to push the game out of control. So I think it is a little bit better versus Odeon, but I do think the Odeon deck's negates specifically push it just a little bit over the edge in term versus Lab.
I'll put it right with Lab. I don't think I can put it in Sol. I think it's just the consistency concerns me, as well as it's not as good into Max C now that we think about it more. All right, moving on to Luna Light. Do you have any insight on this deck? Because I think I have spoken about this before in the past, and my opinion hasn't changed much.
I think this deck is actually worse in the best of 1 format than I thought it'd be. I think the Luna Light deck specifically has very glaring issues into stuff like Fulos and Maxi, particularly right now with Draco Tail in the format. It doesn't have the best matchup into the deck, just because Luna Light doesn't have a half board, right? So your plan into like the Mulcharmies and into Maxi is you just give them as many draws as they want, and you try to set up double Liger. That, however, is very scary into the Draco Tail deck, because eventually they'll just see 5 mana. And if they see 5 mana, the game's probably going to end on the spot, right? They go 5 mana effect, they pitch it from hand. If you don't have Called by the Grave, that sucks. They've just discarded their whole hand. Every card in your grave and field has been bounced. And chances are you probably won't have plays after that, because they've still drawn like 10 cards by the time you're getting to that Liger Dancer.
I think my other concerns with this is I don't have faith in it going second. Not against the combo decks of the format. And I don't have faith against Detail. I think that the traps all just trade really, really effectively into Light, where you have to have a really good hand to deal with a Draco Tail half board. It also gets collateral damage from Retail as well to some degree. When you're going through the poly lines. So I'm inclined to put it in playable. Liger is definitely a card, but it just seems like a trap deck that's not a trap deck. It's not great at going second, and you're trying to win through a cheesy win con as opposed to something that is a bit more solid. The one thing I will say, though, is that it does have more grass going second. I do have more faith in it going second than the trap decks. That being said, not by much.
The one thing I also do have a bit of a concern about is it also does have a really bad matchup into the War Crime cards. You don't play at all under Di-Fi. You don't really play under Shifter at all either. So, like, you see those cards in the format, they go like normal summon Man with the Mark, they add the field spell, they activate Dimensional Fissure. You look at your hand and you go, oh, the game's just over on the spot. I can't do anything. So I don't think I'd put it above Odeon, just because it suffers from just the collateral, as you were saying. And then just the fact that the number of non-engine in the format is also going to be pretty high with Draco Tail in the format. So I think I'd probably drop it down below Odeon.
I think I'm happy with this playable tier right now.
All
right, moving on to one of the very playable decks, which is Malice. So this deck, still alive somehow. We did get the Ramson ban in Master Duel, so we no longer have that. That being said, we do have Splash Mage and Decoder. So once you get side versus on the board, which we have Circular do, we have other Silent Mining, stuff like that. Once you get side versus on the board, it is better. It is a little bit less inconsistent at getting them there, because we also have 1 Dormouse, 1 Field. I think we're still at 3 White Rabbit. I'm mixing them all up.
I think we do have 3 White Rabbit right
now.
Yeah.
But overall is the extra monsters form of Splash Mage and Decoder. I think the biggest benefit of this deck is the fact that you deal with a lot of the quote-unquote war crime cards very effectively. You don't lose a D-Fissure. You're not losing the macro. Shift, these aren't problems. The other thing is that when you get Chummied, I think this deck actually has a fairly decent half board into it. If you can draw cards either off Allure or Chessie, you see 1/2 non-engine in the form of Impulse, Imperm, Ash. They are very, very effective into the format, and a lot of games you will be able to win off that. This is also a deck that can play Droll, because you can self-Droll, and it's still good, while not into Detail, into a lot of the other decks in the top. And so I'm inclined to put this, unfortunately, as much as I don't want to, near the top. I think it's still worse than the Draco Brandon deck, just because that deck is the deck to beat. But I think that is just positioned very well.
I definitely agree. It's kind of scary to think that even with the ransom ban, with some of the events we've been seeing, like the Meta Weekly, Malice is still the second most represented deck in the format. which you shouldn't be seeing, except for the fact that while they did ban Ransom, obviously that's going to be very impactful on the deck. It's not nowhere near as good as it used to be with Ransom because that card's insane. You're still going to see like your opponent's going to open um, like let's say White Rabbit plus a Bestial, and you're going to look at your hand as they go normal summon White Rabbit. You have your Veiler or your Imperm or whatever you have, and you're going to look at it. You're going to go, okay, I'm going to Veiler it. They're going to make Decoder, and they're going to activate a Bestial or Hair or whatever, target or banish the guy from grave, special it back. And they're going to make Binder. They're going to go Binder effect. They're going to go Decoder effect, Binder effect. You're going to look at your hand. You're still going to be like, wait a minute, I'm just losing the game, even if I have a second hand trap here. There's no consistent way really to be able to beat the Malice deck with just like the low impact hand traps that you have in your hand. So we're kind of going to have to settle for, not only is it well positioned because you're able to play cards like Shifter and Di-Fi, but you also have the access to the regular hand traps that every other deck in the format has, while being very, very good because you can also play Impulse versus Draco Tail, and it just has a very solid overall matchup because the traps into Draco Tail don't actually do as much nearly as one would think. The only one that's really good in the matchup is Horn because you can Horn the Link monsters, but outside of that, they all get checked by Linger Rebo, which is very scary. Sting isn't very good into the matchup because there's nothing in the graveyard you really want to banish. And Flame is also not as effective because the deck just doesn't have as many spells as you'd like them to have.
You think we ever put it higher than that? I don't think so. I think that if this deck ever gets better, it gets targeted, it gets worse. I think it's where it is because it's positioned.
I agree. I think it is definitely the deck to beat the best deck. However, I don't think it can ever be the best deck itself.
And the last deck is a Master Duel special deck, which is Orcus Fiendsmith. So we do have Moon as well as Nightmare Mermaid. So both engines bridge both ways. This deck has a lot of gas. Its end board is pretty insane. You have the Babel, the Crescendos as the counter trap, as well as all the links. So the new one, which names Escapes, which is take, IP into SP, into Degrees Descent, as well as Caesar or Desiree on the board. It has a lot of gas. It is a little bit clunky. Kind of. It's not say clunky in the sense that the cards are bad to draw, but they're bad if you're not playing. You need ways of getting them out of the hand, which leads to them being very good at going first. But going second, it has issues. I think this argument, you put this somewhere between playable and very strong, just because it feels either insane once you start playing or just awful if you can't get there, as well as a chummy issue. Where would you see this deck going?
I think I'd see it probably just above Gemini. I think the deck is very good. It has obviously like an insane win rate going first. You have stuff like Normal Summon Girsu, which like outside of Imperm can play through an Ash Blossom. It can play through like a bunch of stuff that it's very solid, even into stuff like a Veiler or an Imperm, just because you can still make the Link one and keep playing by searching the Crown. You special the Crown, there's just full combo still. But I think the deck definitely has like issues with going second, particularly. It's very tough to start like discarding cards out of thin air unless you get to the Link one. But your opponent also obviously is going to set up a board of interactions. The deck doesn't have a particularly large amount of non-engine space either. You can't play like 22 hand traps and just like hand trap your opponent and pray that you may get to your turn. You have a lot of engine requirements in the form of stuff like Nightmare, and in the form of like it really depends on what your Fiendsmith package looks like. But if you're playing like Luri, Lacrima, etc., there's just a lot of cards that are going to be suboptimal to draw, which kind of inclines me to not put it any higher just because your going second isn't great. But your go first win rate's going to be insane outside of Maxi and Fuelos.
The one thing that makes me want to put this up a little bit higher is I think it does have enough stars because you have both the Orcus cards and the Fiendsmith cards. So I'm going to put it above Pure Mitsu there just because it doesn't suffer the consistency issue. It's also okay into the degenerate cards just because the Orcus cards still do function kind of under Defissure. Like you can still get the Galatea and the Ding or the Trap that way, and the Trap gets follow up if you're under Defissure exactly. I think it's fine here.
Yeah, I think I agree with that as well.
Okay, so here's our tier list for the upcoming Master Duel DC Cup. I think overall, like I said, this format is a lot better than what we've had. There's a lot of choice in decks. They feel a bit more manageable. Power level is still current Yu-Gi-Oh, so it's still not as quite as low as I want it to be. But overall, I've been having a lot of fun with that. Leave your comments in the comment section down below if you have any disagreements, if there's any decks that you think that we've missed that should be on here that are much better than we've given them credit for. And make sure you go check out Luka's YouTube channel in the description below. Any comments before we head out, Luka?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I'm very excited for the DC Cup coming up and excited to grind the second stage.
All right. Have a good one, guys.